Well, welcome today. This is an interview I have so looked forward to because these are the pioneers of CIMC, the Curriculum Instructional Materials Center here at the Oklahoma Department of CareerTech. And for long-term vocational educators, now we're career tech educators, have come together. I'm Kimberly Sadler, and I'm the current coordinator of CIMC and Instructional Systems here at the agency. And we've just been having a wonderful time reliving some of the memories of CIMC, which is still today one of the greatest curriculum centers in the United States and one of the most enduring. So that has to speak well of the foundation that the four of you all laid. As far as the four people who have joined us today for this interview, we have Irene Clements. Irene Clements was one of the very first curriculum specialists, joined the agency in 1970 and worked through 1975 and left us to teach at USAO. We then have Chuck Henderson. He was in CIMC from 1970 to 1972, and he then left and taught in the classroom and joined us back at the agency to be a T&I specialist. Bob Patton, you were here the longest. Bob came in 1970 and left in 1987. To then go to work in our tech center system, and Margaret Spann Casey, who was here from 1971 to 1973. So I know that you all are acting kind of solemn, but you've really been laughing a lot today because of all of the experiences that you've shared together. Dr. Tuttle, I guess the Curriculum Center was Dr. Tuttle's brainchild, and he came up with this concept in 1968 that curriculum was needed by our field. Do any of y'all have a vivid recollection of Dr. Tuttle and that vision at that time? Why did he come up with the idea of a concerted effort for curriculum? And I guess you said that Ron Meek was the first person in charge of curriculum. Tell me a little bit about Dr. Tuttle's vision and how Ron Meek came about.
Well, Mr. Meek was the ag mechanics specialist on the ag staff, and always had a strong commitment to quality instruction, even when he was crossing the state teaching us how to be better ag mechanic instructors. He always stressed the need for curriculum, and so he convinced basically Dr. Tuttle, and Dr. Tuttle gave him a 6-month leave of absence from his current position at that time as ag mechanic specialist to travel throughout the United States and take a look at how other state departments of vocational education were developing and coordinating their curriculum effort. And so he came back with his study and made a recommendation to Dr. Tuttle that for a curriculum center to be functional, the staff had to have identity and credibility within their field, and that's why we started out as all specialists in our area. I started out as agriculture education, and Chuck came in as trade and industrial, and we stayed in our discipline, and we wrote materials in the discipline for which we had expertise. And so that's really how we got started. And Irene's home economics.
Was in home economics at that time. So the three of you were three of the very first, and then Margaret, you joined whenever we had CVET curriculum.
Yes, the CVET program was for 9th and 10th graders who were not yet eligible to go into the vocational area schools, the career tech centers. And they also were selected in the schools as being potential dropouts in some cases. You know, that's the way the program was originally set up. And after that program was in place, the vocational part of it, then they decided that they needed related materials, math, English, and social studies, and later science to go with the CVET curriculum. And that's where I came in. I attended a workshop that these people put on. I didn't know what was going on. I was single, and it was summertime, and I was still in bed at 9 o'clock. the superintendent called me and said, "We've got a workshop going on. I need you to go." And I said, "Okay." And that was the first that I'd heard of the Curriculum and Instructional Materials Center.
So these three trained you?
Yes.
That's,
but
okay, that's frightening.
Well,
Because,
no, I'm not that bad.
so Irene, tell me about your first product.
well, I would like to say about Margaret's is that what she was doing was relating the basic subjects to the careers in order to interest the students in staying in school and seeing that math could be used in everyday life and English and all that kind of thing. So that's what she got trained. She got trained to write the objectives, and then she knew the subject matter. So that worked out well.
That's fascinating because that's what we still try to do, and we still fight that today, is integrating academics in our career tech courses. But
Well, and it was successful, I think. In many cases, I think there were dropouts that stayed in school because of that curriculum. So but my first project was Home Economics 2, and I really can't remember why we chose 2 instead of Home Economics 1. Of course, it was I say Home Economics, and it was vocational Home Economics at that time, and we learned to write specific objectives or the objectives for the subject matter, and first of all called in a committee of teachers to say what should this sophomore or this Home Economics 2 student, what should they be learning, and what should they be able to do at the end of the year. And so that's what I did. My first product was that. And I had some help along with that. I had one Home Economics teacher came in to help with that.
as a contract writer?
Yeah, well, yes, and it was a kind of a temporary thing. She came in to help with it.
Okay, Chuck, what was your first product?
My first product was the automotive curriculum. And to back up just a little further, when I come on board, Ron caught me we were just finishing a contest, I think, at Oklahoma City, and he asked me if I'd be interested in the job. And I come over and visited with him, and it was so new. This whole thing was so new, this measurable objective thing, and establishing curriculum, whereas we'd always just kind of open textbook, and when we got done with chapter 1, we went to chapter 2. And so all at once we're establishing a curriculum that we think is what they need to learn or know. And so we had to go through figuring out what measurable objectives were and kind of be in training to start with, which was not easy because they were not well thought of anywhere. We had to not only learn it, but then we had to begin to sell it to committee people. And I can remember some of the arguments, and from some people that were extremely knowledgeable, from some doctors at OSU. I remember, for the lack of a better word, squaring off with Bob and telling him that it wasn't not going to work because we were revealing the test up front, and we needed to surround them with great amounts of information, and then they could kind of figure out what the test was going to be. And so it was a great learning thing, I think, for all of us. And one of the things I remember most of all during the development was that we would interact. We were in a very small office, which I think all of them will visit. It's about the size of this right here. About the size of this table was about the size of the office, and our desks were back to back. But when we would have difficulty with a measurable term or how to say something, we would interact. So we really were constantly visiting among us to find a way to say something or how to write it. And we were writing in an outline form, which was somewhat unique in itself, and extremely informational. I tell the story that when I hired on as a curriculum specialist, I couldn't even spell it to begin with, and after I'd been there for a while, it didn't get any easier. But English was not my best subject, but I assure you, after working 2 years in the curriculum center, I can spot a misspelled word or just about outline any book, because that's what we did. It was tough going. And I know Bob stayed on for a lot of years, and Irene stayed on a while. I really couldn't deal with the desk and the intensity. So once we had developed the 4 that I was obligated for, I went back to classroom because we had convinced ourselves it was so great that teaching it had to be easy, which was not all correct. But it did work. And I taught 13 years and used it. And it worked good. But another neat story was Bob and I got sent to New York to meet with all the measurable objective experts throughout the U.S. and maybe the world. Bob, was there anybody from other countries, just U.S.?
I don't know. I thought
We
it
were
was
in
the
a
world.
This is 1970, and we got 2 farm kids that land in LaGuardia, I guess, and we didn't know how to get to the Americana, which was on Manhattan Island, and we finally ended up in taxi cab, and we got there, and we moved in, and we went to the meetings, and what I remember most was they didn't know a lot more than Bob and I. After we had been working with Ron, and he had his ideas of what this thing should look like, I remember some real good discussions between Bob and some other guys, and they weren't winning the argument. And these were guys that were putting the program on. And so when we felt real good when we returned because we had figured out that we weren't really off base either, and then come back and kind of made up our own rules and developed it. And my first year I wrote the auto and helped with welding. And the second year we did drafting and machine shop, coordinated them. And I'll let some others talk, but there's also some other good stories about delivering, curriculum committees, and some things like that. But Bob, you might want to.
Bob, I'm going to
He
let
had
you.
more trouble than anybody. Bob did.
And still does today. I'm going to let you talk about your first product because I know how near and dear it is to your heart, and you've brought it with you today. So
And
tell
I'm
us
gonna
about.
take it with me where I
I know.
No, Kim, thank you for giving us an opportunity to share with you some of the history of the CIMC. Of all the jobs I've had in my 30-some-odd years in education, is that probably the greatest memories I have is in the CIMC. And probably one of the greatest bosses, supervisors that we ever worked for was Ron Meek. Very patient man, very caring man. I really got started in 1968 when it took the Ag Boys a while to decide we could do it. It also took the home economics people. I think that's the reason we didn't do home economics 1. We jumped to home economics 2, and that's another story. But I don't know, might have been a change in supervisors. That's what happened there. But in 1968, I was a vocational agriculture teacher and was in my 3rd year. And Keith Hoare, the BOAG teacher at Pond Creek, happened to be president of the ag group at that particular time. And he came up to me at summer conference. We used to be when we had our separate conferences. Remember those days?
Yeah, I remember those
we
days.
we couldn't contaminate each other, so we had separate conferences. And Keith asked me if I would be chair of the Ag Curriculum Committee. And I'm like, Chuck, well, what's curriculum? In fact, if I can spell it, I can be chairman. But I was fortunate, and we spent 2 weeks at Oklahoma State University, and we basically came up with what we came up with as the 4-year core. Ag was a little bit different. We looked 4 years down the road. Some of the rest of you, Chuck, couldn't quite look that far down the road, but we came up with, and 25 ag teachers and teacher education and all the state staff spent 2 weeks at Oklahoma State University just trying to identify what do we teach in Ag 1, what do we teach in Ag 2, 3, and 4, and we stopped there. And basically what we came up with, we said any student in any vocational agriculture program in the state of Oklahoma should have a set of core knowledge. There should be some consistency and commonality in what students are able to do in agriculture. And so we produced a little product. I can't find that one, but it's a little 6-page document that spells out Ag 1, Ag 2, and Ag 3. And that was the very first publication published. This book in front of me is the very first curriculum that was published. And it was published in 1970, right 3 days before summer conference. And this is actually the first book of that printing. We printed 5,000 copies. we had that much demand for teacher and student material. It blew our mind that ag teachers would buy that in quantity.
Was there a difference between a teacher and a student book?
Absolutely.
Okay.
You know what the difference was?
No.
The difference was, and that's a good question, I appreciate you asking that. The question, the difference is the answers to the test.
They were in there.
That was the only difference. But we made it easy for the teacher to find the answer. And we printed them on pink paper, I believe. I believe it was pink sheets.
color-coded.
Yeah, it was color-coded, I assure you. So we needed 5,000. The print shop at that time was 2 farm ladies and 2 A.B. Dick chain driven 350 press. And we bought colored paper. And that's why we had different colors of paper. And we printed 2,500 copies, hand collated them, because we had a 25 bin collator at that time, our old Pitney Bowes collator that would shake them around. And so then we made new masters and printed 2,500 more. So that's where we got our start. But the funny thing, Mr. Meek was so sincere. Following that 2-week institute, he agreed to go back and take 1 unit out of Ag 1 to develop us a model of how he thought instructional material should be written. And he had gone to a Bob Mager workshop of where Mr. Mager wrote in his first book, you know, children go to school. You remember that little old video, that little old film strip we used to play? Children go to school to get an education, you know, and that's so true. They still go to school to get an education. But sometimes the student's desires does not match the teacher's desires. And so what he wanted to do is what the student needs to know is what the teacher is teaching. And so they're together. But the very first unit was gas welding, unit 5, and it was for 2 hours. We even thought you could teach this in 2 hours. That's how specific we were. We quickly decided that wasn't going to work, and we dropped. No other book, I think, came out with hours. I don't think you put hours on yours, if you recall, do you? I think we quit that after this first year because we got in so much trouble with trying to spell out the hours of instruction. But this very first unit, gas welding, was written by Tom Lucas, who was a graduate student working on his doctorate. Howard Randall, who took Mr. Meek's place as ag mechanics specialist, and Fred Schultz, who was working on his doctoral program. And I accuse them of taking 6 months to develop this 1 unit, but they finally came out with this unit, and Mr. Meek brought this back to us at Midwinter Conference in 1969. Had it color-coded, handed it out to all of us, to the 25 teachers first on a Friday before conference. We thought it was the best thing since pockets on a shirt, because agriculture, we had to have 50 different books, sort of like home economics. When Irene taught, there's no such thing as one book, like a math book, Margaret, you know, algebra, you know, in 15 chapters. So we find, well, gosh, this is simple. This is great. And I can remember Mr. Meek, somebody asked Mr. Meek, says, when will we have the rest of them? And he said, in August of 1970. And then Mr. Collins, who was the ag supervisor for Southeast District, which was my supervisor, I was at a district livestock show, and Mr. Collins said, do you want to go to Stillwater? I said, to do what? He said, do you want to go be the curriculum specialist for agriculture? He said, Dr. Tuttle's going to be calling you. And so he did. I came up, interviewed, and he asked me basically when did I want to start. So I started in June of 1970 and wrote the rest of the units, and then wrote Ag 2, and then wrote Ag 3, and that was about in 73, Irene, I think, when you and I were made assistant coordinators, if I recall, and you took certain disciplines and I took certain disciplines.
72.
Okay, and that's how we got started. And most books looked the same back then. There was a standard format that we all adhered to. We learned to deal with the cognitive and the affective and the psychomotor domains. And we argued, is this name or identify? Chuck and I had trouble getting to synthesis. I still have trouble with that word.
Well, you know, one thing that's interesting is that the more you talk about how it was 33 years ago, the more it's just like it is today, almost, and the same problems. And whenever Ron Meek had this vision, what do you think his big vision was for how curriculum would be used in the classroom, and his passion and Dr. Tuttle's passion for this? Tell me a little bit about Dr. Tuttle and Ron Meek at that time.
Well, both of them were dedicated educationalists. They were dedicated to vocational education, and it was almost a religion with Ron Meek.
Oh, absolutely.
It was something that he lived and breathed. I think the thing that has been beneficial about it, and the thing that they had in mind, is that you could take the curriculum, look at it, and anyone, parent, teacher, or whomever, and say, oh, these are the things this student's going to learn. It was in black and white. And the student could do that. It aided in counseling the student on what they might want to take, or what subjects they might want to take, which was, I think students like to know what they're trying to do. Mm-hmm. And if they know what they're trying to do, they will work harder at it. And so I think that's where they were on that, and it turned out that it worked very, very well. Dr. Tuttle was, of course, he was for all the subject matter areas, and he had a vision of being one of the best vocational education enterprises in the United States, and he ended up with that goal achieved, I think. If not the best, right up there at the top with the best. So we do have a good reputation in the nation.
And I'd just like to piggyback on something Irene said, and I totally agree with everything that she said, particularly about Ron and Dr. Tuttle. Dr. Tuttle said many a times that he would have been a better vocational agriculture teacher at Godebo, mm-hmm. where he started his teaching career, if he had had something like this to follow. And we used to sell it that this is 60%. Mm-hmm. Remember those days?
Yeah, and you could do the rest of it.
Yeah,
was
the
for
40% is to
do.
localize it,
Mm-hmm.
to supplement it, to write in the margin, to show a film. And that was the story we told you, remember? And that's what convinced you to join us.
And to bring in
from academics, see? Yeah,
and
that's
also
good.
to bring in local people.
Yeah,
And that involved
absolutely.
local people in the community, the community people in the education enterprise. So it was, it has lots of advantages.
So when you first came, there were 4 originals, and then Margaret, you were right there very soon after taking Don Hebert's place. But you were telling a story about the office space, and sometimes we get kind of territorial around here, and we want our big office, and we want a window, and we don't like it if it's too hot. But tell us about your conditions in 1970 and what your office was like.
Very small. Bob and I, about this far apart, we had 2 desks, and they pushed against one another, and if I remember, Irene sat to the right of me, and Don, and so they were just about where these 2 people are, and we were about right here. There was a walk area here, and Bob brought up a while ago that we had 1 telephone. Did we have 1 on each desk?
No, we had one
we
phone.
had one
One
And a
phone.
long cord, and we just passed it.
Passed it around. But
We didn't have the money back then that we have now, so that must have been.
on that, what Bob was saying about that 60%, in the T&I division, we tried to create a foundation that we felt like all students needed to know. And if we could create that, and we had teachers that we felt like if they would just teach what was in that, we'd be better than what we were doing. And then we had some that supplemented it a lot. But that probably helped us more than anything, was to find a structure that we could operate within. And those curriculum committees, those were a lot of fun, because we'd have 5 or 6 of the better, what we considered some of our more outstanding teachers come in, and we would more or less try to get the material through committee, and we would actually read each word, and read it. I mean, we didn't scan it. The curriculum specialist sat up there and read the objective, and then we would follow that a lot of times through with the information sheet and the job sheet and the assignment sheets clear through the test question. And if that got through, well, that was fine. And you can't imagine how many times that stuff stopped dead in its tracks and backed up and sidetracked. And it was, I mean, we all, I think, dreaded curriculum specialists when they come in, or not the committee. If we could get something through committee, it was like a new breath of air. We were on our way then.
Oh, yeah.
The length of discussion sometimes was
Was
long.
incredible. And we
Over
could
word
argue
or-
over a word.
Yes.
And one guy, like Bob said a while ago, well, should we name this, or should they be able to recognize it from a picture, or just name it from memory? What, you know, what's best here? Well, we'd figure out what was best. Well, I didn't think that was best at all. And then the argument would start, and we become pretty good, for the lack of better words, of shoving it down their throat, didn't we, Bob? And getting them out of there before they could change their mind. No, not really. But there was some testy days. I mean, and again, I guess it comes back, but we didn't have very many allies. We were not, the colleges didn't like us. I don't think anyone liked us.
Certainly did.
Because we were just, it was too simple, and it was just, you know, you're telling them up front. I mean, you're telling them they need to name 5 things, and you're going right over here and testing them on 5 things. How good can that be? And you know, it looked great to me, because I would have learned a lot better in school, because I always studied the wrong page anyway before the test. But we had a selling job, and then once Bob said we got that stuff collated, 9 times out of 10 we took it out to them.
Absolutely.
And I think Irene was in that old station wagon. We went over to the OSU and got an old white station wagon, and we must have had 600 or 800 pounds of it might have been CVET books in the back of it. I don't remember where we were. I'm driving, and we hit a railroad track going about 70 miles an hour. That was not a small bump. And I looked in the mirror, and I saw shock absorbers rolling down the highway. Parts had fallen off of this car. We just kept going. Checked it back in at OSU, no problem. But we would take that out and in-service those teachers at the schools a lot of times, and then if we handed something out at August conference, we would in-service it. And that's exciting, to hand 90 auto mechanics teachers a book and then stand up there and try to get them through it.
And we still do it that way.
I know,
And
that's
I mean,
exciting.
It's just so interesting that the things that people are worried about on not liking objectives being shoved down your throat. And like Ag 1 was our #1 seller. And Ag 1, this is today's Ag 1, and this is still the #1 seller. Now, I've taken some out because ours is bigger than this, and Bob says that we've ruined it, but but it's really still the best way to teach career tech teachers.
And amazingly, I think teachers have come to recognize that, and recognize that they're not being robbed of their teaching ability or anything like that. This is an assistance for them, and it's not all that they need to teach, and they can localize it, as we said before. And to me, it's one of the good things for the student, because they can see. And I actually, if I'm going to teach something, I hope that I teach it. And I don't care if it's specified in the book and in the objectives. If that's what they need to know, then that's what to teach. Right. And they can make a better grade. So they make a good grade, that's great.
And excuse me, Margaret, you were going to say something.
I was just going to say that with the academic teachers, I often ran into some problems too. Not so much with teaching them what's going to be on the test. They didn't object a whole lot to that, but it was behavior problems. And this happened after I had gone back to Lindsay to teaching, and Jack Heron called me and told me that they were having one of the school districts that I won't name now was having a teachers meeting discussing various things, and that he was having some problems with the related teachers, and he wanted me to go talk to them. He didn't tell me that he was dropping me in the middle of a hornet's nest. But this one English teacher she was just adamant that, she named Johnny and said, he's just ruining the whole thing. I just think that this program is awful because of the way he acts and so on. And so I let her vent all her frustrations, and then I asked her, I said, where would Johnny be if he weren't in the CVET English class? She sat there for a minute. She said, he would be in my English 2 class and ruining it. So I think I won her over. At least she wasn't down on CVET related English anymore. And she was kind of thankful she had him in that small class instead of in her large English 2 class.
I remember some of the academic CVET teachers kind of making the adjustment over and becoming quite excited about the application of this. The first time they had really been concerned about application, and all at once they're writing checks, they're making out parts lists, they're moving this from the trade or the occupation right back to something usable, and they were kind of surprised, I think, and taken back that it made so much sense all at once.
So was there resistance from the academics, the academic side of education to us being in their business? No?
We had good support.
It was just a changing of thinking.
Kind of the same thing that vocational teachers had in the beginning.
Right,
That it was new, and how people are with new ideas, it kind of resist.
For 50 years,
why
should I change now?
Right.
Kim, you made a statement a while ago is we're still doing some of the similar things that we did, 30 years ago. And that goes back to some of the things that Mr. Meek learned and each of us learned when we went to the workshop. Many states made a mistake by developing the material and just sending it out. That was the delivery system. And what they found then, when they would go back around and look after something had been released for several years, teachers had shelved it. So we came up, you remember, with development, dissemination, and diffusion, remember? Sometimes it wound up being confusion instead of diffusion. But,
write that down.
we always, every time we handed them a book, we had a little bit of time to open it up and let them look at it. And then we started going around and doing the workshops. During the summertime and those kinds of things. And I think that there also is what helped make it what it is today.
Why it's usable.
Yeah, right.
Why it's usable.
And we used the same format. Remember how we used to do the folders?
Yeah.
I found my old folder the other day. Of all these years, we used to develop that little, tear it apart, and put it in folders so we could supplement it and localize it and personalize. Remember the apple?
Yeah. Apple core.
The four bites to the old apple core, Chuck, you used it. Have you forgot that?
I think I left.
You thought that was a banana, probably, didn't you?
We didn't peel it.
Well, now the color coding is the one thing that our teachers still say, I wish you'd go back and color code the book.
I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
Trying to use it.
We still get teachers who say, I sure do miss that color coding.
Blue information
It's much
sheets and
easier to
yellow test
use.
questions.
It's kind of like selecting lumber. You go to select lumber, and it's color coded on the end, and all you have to do is pull it out.
I hadn't thought of it that way.
Okay, well, this interview may just be the thing that turns the whole CIMC around so that we go a different direction. Okay, so tell me, I know you've shared that you were 4 in an office and that you were really cramped, but where were you located? Where was CIMC located back then? I know it started with Ron Meek and one secretary, and then you all came.
Our first office was in the south, was within the northeast corner of the Perky building, wasn't it?
south.
Well,
Southwest.
when I
Don't-
came, it was
no.
in a new building.
Yeah, we were in the,
In the new building?
Yeah, the new Perky building.
Okay.
That's the
Okay.
building
That
they
was the
call the
Perky-
Perky. They
okay.
named that building the Perky building.
Okay, yeah.
And we were in that little office. Mr. Meek had an office.
Now, he was northeast.
Right, and then we had the little bigger office than Mr. Meek, and then we had one secretary, and then Mr. Cotton and Francis, because Francis was dubbing as editor
Mm-hmm, yeah.
and Mr. Cotton's secretary.
right.
And you said the print shop was about where we're sitting.
The print shop is where
Right
we're
now.
sitting.
Where
Yeah.
there was a little white building out
It wasn't this large.
Right.
Oh no, it was small.
But it was right here where we're
Pretty
sitting.
much. When
Isn't
you
that
think, Bob,
something?
Yeah, because we stacked the paper down the hall because we didn't have enough room to stack it when we'd print the green sheets or the yellow sheets.
When I came on board, they'd really gotten affluent. Each of them had an office,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
they needed a spot for me.
Where'd we put you?
So they bought these divider things like you see in the restrooms, you know,
you in the
the
hall.
translucent things. And Frances Braden, who was editor, was quite a cut up anyhow, and she went into the restroom and recorded a toilet flushing, and she set the thing in there on my desk and turned it on.
She was mean.
So I was in a corner of the outer office, but I had these things. But I couldn't have a private conversation on the telephone because they were open under here and, of course, open at the top. And and the secretaries would get a bang out of some of my conversations sometimes because they could overhear everything I said.
So you did actually have your own offices
Yes, I had
before too long.
Well, and Bob Ray was one of the artists that we had, and he was an outdoors man, and he had no outdoor, no window, no anything like that. So he bought himself a poster with trees and a pond on it so he could see outside.
Well, everybody still does want. Everybody still does want a window to the outside. So one of the things I marvel at now, 30 years later, is that if you look around the country, there used to be a lot of different curriculum centers, and almost every state had some initiative like this. And right now, the CIMC sells over $2 million worth of curriculum a year. And we have over 2,000 products, and we looked at some of those earlier today. Why do you think all the other states have failed and their initiatives have closed down and they've stopped producing curriculum? And what in the vision of how CIMC did it made us endure that we're still here 33 years later?
I think that's I'll take a shot at it. One is states fail because they didn't have a foundation. They didn't have the foundation and they didn't have the philosophy. I also think they started with not having the credibility with the field. Our strength, Irene was an outstanding teacher. Chuck, nobody questions Chuck's ability to teach. I've wondered sometimes why I got in, with my ability, but no one questioned those. When we came in, we were recognized as a person that ran good programs, and we can make a difference, and that's what we did. And we took our work serious. Would y'all agree with that?
Yeah, and I would say this, and it's what you referred to earlier, Bob. We had and you referred to teacher committees.
Absolutely.
And they got where they would be supportive after they went through the whole thing.
Yeah, once they would agree to it, it was pretty well a good thing then.
Yeah, and the curriculum was delivered and
In service.
had in service.
Right.
And I think that's why, because if you do that, the teachers learn to use it.
One of
And
the
so-
things too, and Bob got close to it with his terminology, but this Department of Vocational Education has had some commitments, and they don't back up. Once they commit, and we had the staff and the commitment to do it, and they're not stopping. They never have stopped. You can see that in the area schools, and and all the things that this system has been responsible for. Other states doesn't have that kind of State Department for the lack of whatever the career systems or whatever they call them. They have some career centers, but they don't have a system of delivery like we do to watch out and take care of things.
And answer questions and go out to help if they
Yeah.
need the help.
One of the things I think was extremely neat was after the 2 years that I had worked at the Curriculum Center, during that time we would make presentations at various things at AVA and places like that, and we would encounter other people and they would have us to their states. I know Bob did a lot of traveling. And I went to Texas and worked with their curriculum people as a consultant, and Colorado, taught two summers at Colorado State University with this instructional materials development, and so it opened there was great interest from other areas.
Chuck Henderson is the reason, he's too modest to say it, but Chuck Henderson is the reason that we landed the relationship with the Associated General Contractors of America in the Colorado workshop.
Oh, really?
There was an individual by the name of Duke Nielsen. You remember old Duke? Chuck was doing a workshop for auto mechanics, but Duke had an education background and he wanted to go to that, so he attended part of Chuck's workshop. And he left that workshop feeling so positive about we need something like that for Associated General Contractors. So he told Paul Emmerich, who was chair of the Manpower and Development Committee of AGC out of Portland, Oregon, probably one of the world's largest contractors. He flew in his own Learjet, piloted himself, flew into Oklahoma with Duke Nielsen, had a meeting with Dr. Tuttle, Mr. Meek. They shook hands on the very first agreement. They formed a partnership where we started writing materials for the Associated General Contractors of America, and the first book we published was Carpentry. We had done the residential side, but they wanted the commercial side. And that formed the partnership that lasted from 1973 until it was dissolved here
In about 1999.
Yeah.
And did you know that we're talking with them again
You should.
about reestablishing that
You should.
partnership? So
You should. Congratulations.
yeah, so that's great.
But if it hadn't been for, and it goes back to what Irene was saying, we had to believe in it. We sincerely believed in it. I mean, we got upset.
You got upset. You were the one that got upset.
But when they
We control now.
when they would criticize us writing those objectives and how we wrote them and that test question, I mean, it got personal. we believed in it so much that, and Chuck was up doing that, and that landed us the Associated General Contractor contract.
Well, something else you mentioned is that you were all specialists. I know Margaret came from an academic specialty, and that's why she came in for CVET, and you were from Ag, and you were from TNI, and you were from Home Ec. And right now, we've grown from a staff of, there must have been about 6 of you back then, total staff, to we have a staff of about 30. But we have so many products going on that we don't have specialists anymore. We have generalists, so people who coordinate projects and bring in those people with the special knowledge. I know the color coding is really important to you, and we've messed that up. But what do you? But what do you think is lost? That's another thing I always wonder about. What is lost when we have generalists? We can't really, it's not practical for us to have specialists anymore, but we're still hanging in there. But what are the pros and cons of the specialists and generalists?
I really think you can have a generalist who knows the format to write the curriculum if you will have teacher committees come in and say, this is what we need. And you get an outline like that, can't you?
Right. Basically, I was a generalist because I could write the math curriculum, but we did use math teachers to, we did a workshop with just related teachers and had them, give us an outline of, and they actually wrote a few units, of things. But I went to school to learn math. I didn't go to school to learn English, but I did learn a little bit of it. But, you know, so far as writing the English and the social studies and the science, I had to have someone else come in with the expertise, you know. They could tell me what we needed to do, and then I could put it in the format.
So you're really kind of our guinea pig in how that whole philosophy of today works. The first generalist, because that's really how we do that now. And another thing I wanted to ask you all about, because you were talking about it earlier, is the equipment. And you talked about how you produced it, and that you had I think you said you had a typewriter, a manual typewriter. How did you produce Ag 1?
Well, we either typed it on a typewriter, or we'd write it out longhand, to however we could do it, and we'd cut and paste where we could without in violation of the copyright laws and all things like that. And then we'd give it to a secretary. Back then, we only had one secretary, if I recall, that was trying to juggle that. The communication center or the comp center, that was not even part of the deal. So we'd actually type them by electric typewriter. And then we finally got us the old mag card, not the mag card, the reel-to-reel. Remember that?
Yeah.
And Francis Braden was the meanest editor that I think we ever had in my life. And I guess I'm the only one. I think Chuck sweet talked her and got by, and I probably tried to argue, and that's where he said, reject, rewrite. So anyway, we got this big piece of equipment. It was about as big as this desk. You remember how big that thing was? And Bell Edge from Kingfisher, remember, was our first typist on that. And I was trying to get, I think, Ag 2 out. Might have been the last part of Ag 1. But anyway, Frances kept getting the same mistakes on the units, and she was going ballistic and just on those cigarettes, you know, just going ballistic. And come to find out, Belle had not quite mastered the use of the machine, and she was using liquid paper. So she kept correcting that copy, but you know how many committees it went through? Rewrite, you know, send it to this person, send it to this person. And it always got changes to it. And kind of find out that's what was happening. She was not correcting the tape. I've always thought that was one of the funniest stories that we went through. You've got a funny one too about the secretary that told you about the puddle when you were doing welding.
You, go ahead, Bob.
Coward.
Don't incriminate me.
Earl Cowan, superintendent of the Technology Center in Canadian County, wrote the welding book, and you were the coordinator of that book. And it's something about produce a puddle.
Oh, yeah,
And
produce a puddle.
You remember when she wrote back her poodle could do that? Henderson came in. He used to come in at my desk, and he'd take his manuscript and go. And he'd pull his chair back, reach in there and get him a little bite of his cigar, and like that, and he'd scoot up to his desk and he'd say, I don't know how much longer I can put up with this. I heard that for 3 years.
Well, he says he only stayed 2 years,
only
so
two.
I heard it
you didn't have much fortitude.
He remembered it the third year.
But that was a funny story.
There is.
Go ahead, Irene.
Well, I was just going to say there's something serious, though, that I think we might want to say, and that's about the consortium that was formed.
Absolutely.
The consortium of states, and I can't remember all the states or how many, but it was states that were close by.
Started out at 10, remember?
10? No, I didn't remember. But, but anyway, the states had representatives, and we'd get together and work on curriculum.
Right.
And that is one of the things I think that helped establish the curriculum and get it started in a larger area.
Let's piggyback on that because it started out as being the Midwest Curriculum Coordination Center. No,
No, it's
oh,
different.
No.
It's
Oh, that was
Midwest.
before
It's way
Mopsy.
before
That was
Mopsy.
before Mopsy.
Okay.
And Mr. Meek, here again.
Yeah.
He was always such a futuristic person in the curriculum area. He got to saying, we need to pull states together and start sharing. And so the federal government released a proposal
Yeah.
to create regional centers. And we held the first meeting of each center in the old library,
Yeah.
and they divided up the United States into the six
Educational
Six
districts.
educational
or whatever
districts,
they
didn't
called
we?
it. Yeah.
and that's how we came about. And then an outgrowth of the Midwest Curriculum Coordination Center was
MOSI.
the Mid-America Vocational Consortium.
Yeah.
And Ann was Home Economics Curriculum Specialist.
And then she was
She was the
director.
executive director of the Mid-America, the
Yeah.
first one.
She's moved right along. She's our state
Yeah.
director now.
We gave her good training.
Yeah.
We gave
and
her good
I was
training.
I'd written down some names of people. Just I think about everybody in this agency practically has come through. Dr. Benson and Janetta Shipp and Eddie Smith, Ivan Armstrong, Sheila, Sarah Mussett, Greg Pierce, James Sharpton. So many of them started their careers in
Manuel.
who was that?
Well, we might have been. Yeah.
Didn't he, the guy from OT Autry?
Yeah.
He's on
I
staff. He
need-
wrote the
Auto body.
auto body.
I was just thinking when the career education grant was received, that brought in several more people, and there
Yes,
went
right here.
there went my space.
That was in 1972, and I'm looking at the names. Grace Pierce, Keith Harp, Ivan Armstrong, Eddie Smith, James Sharpton, John Friedman, Frank Nelson, Joyce Sawatsky, Donna Cates. I mean, so many of them are Jamie Trotter, Margaret Spann, Janetta Shipp. They're all
At that time, they actually gave us some more office space, but Ann Benson, Dean Reeder, and I shared an office, and Ann was extremely pregnant, and Dean and I had to keep our desk pulled back so there was room for her. And when she sees this, she will probably kill me.
Weren't you in the basement?
No, we were in the northeast
basement?
corner.
We never went to
Okay.
the basement.
Northeast corner of the Perky building.
We were afraid they'd lock us in.
Yeah, we did move around. So.
Well, I know Ann talks about while she was pregnant going to the basement. So, oh yeah, I mean a lot of history has come through CIMC.
We
so.
kept moving in the Perky building until everybody got tired of us, because we always kept looking for bigger space.
And it really didn't work out that way, did it?
So
There's
some of
always
our
somebody else to
some
put
of
in.
our moves, we got less space, but we kept trying to move around, and our coworkers didn't quite want us to move into there. Ag always had the best space, but not any of us dared to go to the old ag where ag used to be. Now ag's where we used to be. Laugh at Eddie every now and then. Eddie's got the office I used to have, but we moved over to the old church.
Oh right. And what year was that?
77. Is after Mr. Meek died.
And it was after I left here.
It was an old brick structure, just an old two-story, well, it was an old church. And it was in terrible shape. And Tuttle didn't want us to go over there. He really was against it. But I told him it would be in the best interest of the CIMC because we had more space to consolidate our work and so forth. And so we moved over there, and then of course they wound up renovating it and made it a beautiful building, added on, and so we stayed there for a long time.
That's where you were when I came to the agency.
I have a story about while they were in that building, Bob contacted me about a position. I can't remember now what it was, but I agreed to come up and talk to them. But when I got here, there was Bob, be working with him in the CIMC. There was Chuck Hopkins because there was some research going on. There was someone else there, I can't remember now who it was. And this old Indian got scared. I didn't want that many chiefs. So I said, I'm going back to Lindsay and teach algebra.
Nice move.
You know that Irene and I were with the at the pretty much the inception of it, and Bob with the first curriculum, and we were under Ron, which was great man. But following Ron, after we lost him, Bob come on and stayed a long time, and I think a lot of the things that happened were direct credit to his vision and things. I know he's tough and he's got his ideas that he wanted to implement, and I've heard his speeches a lot of times, and I sat there and wonder sometimes if he knew what he was talking about, but he did put a lot of good materials together, and I think he was largely responsible for a lot of the growth, or at least was there during a lot of the growth, because when I left, we were still pretty much in the embryo stage, and then the next, 15 or 20 years that Bob had a hold of it, it grew into, and the stuff, as I understand it, I know Ivan come in and wrote a revised auto behind the one I had written, and I think that thing began to get in other languages, didn't it, Bob, and get sent all over the country. So I thought that was
still calls it ridiculum. Did you know that?
You know, you mentioned something a minute ago, and I wanted to jump in there about changes and things. I was working at a Votech school out in western Oklahoma, and my son was teaching automotive and was gone, and so I stepped into sub one day, and we were in the steering system, and I opened the curriculum up, which I am quite familiar with because I wrote the first one, and I throw the book open, and it says, name the parts of a power steering pump. And I'm thinking, where did that come from? I've been in this trade all my life, and I don't know the inside of a power, and who needs to know that? And I'm thinking, we used to have a rule, if in doubt, leave it out. Do we need to know this? No, I don't think so. We just left it out. If the instructor wanted to do it, now we're putting that kind of stuff in there, and I'm a little concerned about that, because I'll bet you couldn't find a technician in Kingfisher that could name those parts. And here we're asking a high school kid. I'm wondering if there wasn't something else that was more important. And maybe it's all changed now, but I know I said, Rip, we don't need to know that. We'll go to the next objective.
Don't you think some of that gets in now because of the process? Remember how we reviewed? We didn't send it out ahead of time.
Yeah.
You remember, we went through it page by page, and a Harold Yoakum or an Abel Henneke would come up and say, that's stupid. You remember they used to say that to us? That's stupid.
And other things.
Yeah, and a few adjectives with that. You know, so, you know, I think...
Lockstep probably in how things were taught, and now it's people go into areas and concentrate probably a little more, and it's a little bit more open entry, open exit maybe. That's a reason.
Our biggest problem in home economics is home economics too, and I remember this so clearly, that we worked on the parts of the animal, the meat cuts, and the teachers had a fit. They did not want, they didn't think that their students needed to know one cut from another particularly. They just needed to know what a good beef looked like or good pork. So we left it out, and you know, I still think once in a while, I still think that's important.
Absolutely. Our values.
That probably came from Bob. Bob probably thought it was important.
But evidently, it's worked all right, because I don't think it's ever been put in.
Well, we have a meets curriculum now, so maybe
Do you?
maybe that's where it's all ended
That
up.
sounds good.
And probably in honor of you. So.
Well, thank you.
I'll tell you a neat story I encountered the other day. I had the opportunity to go down to Oklahoma State Tech at Okmulgee and do a NATAF evaluation. That's an evaluation of their automotive program, and I was the team leader, so I get to review all their curriculum and things. And we got into the safety unit. It's the old auto safety unit.
Safety unit.
Still there. Still pretty effective. It's very simple and very plain, but I thought, you know, this thing's written 30 years ago, but I mean, it doesn't really go out of character, because safety's safety and all that stuff still applies, but I thought that was so neat. I'm not even sure that it was a very good Xerox copy of the original, but it was in there.
Well, we are probably at a point where we're going to wrap things up, but one thing I wanted to know is we have a vision for our agency that we help prepare students for the workplace, and that's we want them to succeed in the workplace. And what do you all think CIMC's major contributions have been in helping Oklahoma's instructors still as they strive to meet that goal of helping students succeed in the workplace?
Well, certainly the curriculum gives direction to instruction, and I think that was one of the original purposes. And we're not just throwing the doors open and saying, here's a classroom. We're also providing them with a structure that they can follow, that they can enhance, that they can delete, and like Bob said, localize or personalize, and everybody knows where they're going. And I think that's had a great bearing on how successful a lot of our programs have been. And you cover all of them now, and probably programs that didn't exist when I was here. So
I would say don't abandon our philosophy that we started with, back from the days of the Smith Hughes even, is that where we're preparing people for work or for further education. And in that preparation for work or further education is we have to teach them to use their mind, and that was the old knowledge objectives. We have to teach them to use their hands. That's in the hands-on part that's so important to vocational technical education. And most importantly, we can't sacrifice the affective, which is the heart. And that's what our student organizations have always done. And I think if we stay with that and broaden our mission, not only are we preparing them for work, but we're preparing them for further education, then we're doing what the Oklahoma people want us to do.
And human relations. When you get into the affective domain, you get into the human relations, and I know some employers say teach them the skills, and we'll take care of the human relations, but can't do that.
They don't say that anymore.
They don't.
almost say teach them the human relations, and I'll try and teach them the skills.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Because the skills are easier to teach in a way.
If you'll go back and look at all the early writings, every unit, and I've heard Mr. Meek say this 1,000 times, every unit has to have an assignment sheet and or a job sheet.
some application.
Yeah.
If it doesn't have application, when in doubt, leave it out.
I'll try and remember that one. Margaret, did you have any closing
yes.
comments?
When I came on board here, I was a minority because these were all vocational people, and here I was a math teacher. But as I looked at the textbooks that I used, like you said, we had one book for Algebra 1, and there they were just laid out. But as I look at the textbooks today, they have the objectives,
Absolutely.
and they have the applications
Absolutely.
and everything, and I think that right here is where that started.
So we blazed a lot of trails.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think we have to, what we're trying to do is, I can remember in the accountability resolution, when the academic teachers were called upon to write their objectives, to implement their objectives, and to evaluate their effectiveness. Then we went into competency-based, we went into outcome-based, and all those things. Remember, that's what we started with. That's what we started with. And I'm sort of glad, even to the competency tests that we're doing now and the articulation agreements that we have, is based upon that sound principle out there.
The more things change, the more they stay the same. It's a good foundation. Well, I can't tell you all how much I've enjoyed spending the afternoon with you and finding out where the true foundation came for how we still do our work today, and very enduring, and probably speaks well to the four of you that we still do curriculum pretty much the way you all outlined it 33 years ago. So I appreciate so much you being with us and sharing your memories, and I hope we stay in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate being able to be here too.
Absolutely.
It's been
For sure.
fun.
And Bob, I'll take that off your hands any day.
No deal.
You want an OT and I want one?
Yes, I do.
I'm I'm not sure I still have my home economics. I took them with me when I